Claude Opus 4.7, which just dropped. I've been playing around with it all morning. So far, so good, but I want to look at the community's reaction because so far it has not been particularly positive. The community as a whole is not buying the Opus 4.7 hype. As always, when we get a new model, it tends to be the best thing since sliced bread. If we go to the actual official announcement, they're telling us that it's the best at this, it's the best at that, it's the best at everything that you can possibly throw at it. Every time we get a new model, this is what we are told. I'm not doubting this, but we need to not pay as much attention to these benchmarks as they're not going to release anything until it is ready. The only thing that I find interesting is the Mythos preview benchmarks that they have included. Mythos is the ChatGPT secret model that they are not allowing into the public. This is the first time I've seen Anthropic put in a model like this, which is not released. I don't even know how they have access to it. So the fact that they've put these benchmarks in is very interesting. Oh, they must have used the ChatGPT benchmarks. That's very silly of me. So they are saying, hey, it's not as good as Mythos, but it's better than everything else out there. I guess this is to preempt people asking, what about Mythos? But it is there, and it looks like Opus 4.7 is good. It is a good model. However, there's a few caveats here, some big caveats, and these all connect to rumblings against Anthropic over the last couple of months. And I'm saying this as a massive fan of Claude, as a massive fan of Anthropic and what they do. I think this meme maybe sums it all up. Okay, let's drop a more powerful than Sonnet 4.6, but make it consume tokens more. Slowly make it dumber, reduce its capability, slow it down so they don't notice. Drop the original Opus 4.6 as 4.7, let it consume even more tokens. This is what it feels like. Over the last month or so, people have been complaining that Opus 4.6 has been getting dumber and dumber. It's been using up their limit quickly. Even I have felt this. I'm on the $200 a month plan, and I've never had any issues with limits on Claude models until this month. I started to slam into my limits, which is something I have not experienced for a long time. So if you're on the $20 a month, if you're on the $100 a month, it must have been incredibly frustrating. So Opus 4.6 comes out, apparently gets dumber and dumber and dumber. The limits increase at the same time, and then Opus 4.7 is dropped. What people are saying, and this is speculation, they're saying it is basically what we had with the original 4.6. They have called it 4.7, but it is the same kind of level as the original 4.6, just without the slowdown, without the token limits that we have been given over the last month or so. And we've got things like it is the same pricing, but as I'm going to show you, it is not. They have a new tokenizer, which means it uses 3 times as many tokens. So you might have the same pricing per token, but if the model uses 3 times as many tokens, it's 3 times less expensive. We're going to get into this in a moment. Great, good model, very exciting, but there's a little bit more to this. And I say this as somebody who loves Anthropic and what they do. We need to be wary of this launch. And I think there's going to be a lot of backlash. I think there's going to be a lot of people who are pissed off with this one. So I've been looking on Reddit. I've been looking on Hacker News. So the top one on Hacker News is I can't notice any difference between 4.7 and 4.6 from 3 weeks ago, except that this model burns way more tokens and produces much longer plans. To me, it seems like this model is just the same as 4.6, but with a bigger token budget on all effort levels. I guess this is one way how Anthropic plans to make their business profitable. I think this is all connected to their business model and to their IPO that is coming up. They need to show profitability, which is something that OpenAI are not doing. Anthropic are moving towards it much faster. And I don't think they want individuals, people like myself, people like yourself, using their models. They want businesses. They want API. They want enterprise. That is all they care about. So if we bitch and complain about this, they do not care. So I think we're going to see a lot of criticism like this. Ethan Mollick talking about the adaptive reasoning, but they've replaced extended reasoning with adaptive reasoning, which is worse in all ways. And I'll talk about why that is. And generally, people are saying that this is basically going back to 4.6, but charging us an awful lot more for it. And again, these are great models. 4.6 is fantastic. 4.7 is, so far, very good. It's just becoming more and more expensive to access this level of intelligence. I remember when 4.6 came out, 4.6 was a moment for a lot of us. We saw the future, the glimpse of pushing towards AGI. The fact that 4.6 came out and it was that much better. and it could rip through coding tasks that we'd been stuck on for a long time. It could rip through complicated problems, business plans, anything that you threw at it. And then over the next month or two, it slowly became less impressive. I think the intelligence level probably stayed the same, but we started to hit limits much earlier, so we couldn't do as much with it. Part of this is hedonic adaptation. We get used to something quickly, and then we expect more. And when something stays the same, we think it's getting worse. Limits were definitely a real issue. I don't think 4.7 is going to make that any better. If anything, it's going to make it worse. Let's have a look at the adaptive thinking, for example. This is one of the most extreme examples of enshittification inside of this new model. I'm going to look at Ethan Mollick's quote on this. The new Claude Opus 4.7 now only has adaptive reasoning. So they got rid of extended thinking. It only has adaptive reasoning. Previously, you could tell it to use reasoning or not. Based on my testing, it is bad in the ways that all AI effort routers are bad, but magnified by the fact there is no manual override like in ChatGPT, where you can pick your model and how hard it thinks. So if you toggle it on, it's going to decide what level of effort, how much juice to put into the problem. The problem is auto routing. It's going to decide itself whether your problem is worth spending extra tokens on. If it cannot make that decision properly, then we end up with worse results, which is very frustrating for the user. Now, remember, this happened with GPT 5.1. No, I did not make a slide on this. Sorry, GPT-5. When GPT-5 came out, it basically had one mode. It had GPT-5, and you couldn't really adjust which model you used. OpenAI wanted to make it easier to use, so you just go in and the model would decide what level of reasoning effort is required. It would auto-route it to the high, medium, or low, or mini, or minimal, which was fairly stupid. The problem was, if it got the routing wrong, then you would get an answer that didn't fit the level of the question. And they did get it wrong, and everybody hated GPT-5 because of that, because you had no control. So over time, OpenAI added all of the functionality back in. They wanted one model. That did not work for them. So they ended up with, I think, about 6 or 7 models overall. So with the auto routing, the problem was, well, it didn't work. As Ethan Mollick is saying here, it basically never works, and it annoys people, especially power users. And a lot of people who are using Claude, a lot of people who are using high-end models like Opus 4.6, Opus 4.7, they want control. Anthropic have taken that away from them with this new adaptive reasoning. So you can set thinking levels in Claude Code, but not in Claude Cowork. That's another bizarre split that they have in their ecosystem. They now have a lot of different tools, a lot of different harnesses, and it's increasingly fragmented, and it's hard to know where you should be doing what work. So AI companies seem to keep assuming that coding and technical work is the only kind of important intellectual work out there. It is not. Ethan says that he has been told by Anthropic that they're looking at ways of fixing this, which is good. So a bit like ChatGPT, when the unified model for GPT-5 came out, there was so much public hatred of it that they very quickly backtracked. I think we'll see something similar in the next few days with Anthropic on the adaptive thinking. Okay, so that's one of the very negative points. The tokenizer. Now, this is something that I think a lot of people are going to miss. They have told us that the pricing per token is the same. Cool. So they're saying this is going to cost you the same amount as Opus 4.6, the current model, but you're going to get even more intelligence. So that sounds exciting. This is the official announcement from Anthropic. They say migrating from Opus 4.6 to Opus 4.7. Opus 4.7 is a direct upgrade to Opus 4.6, but 2 changes are worth planning for because they affect token usage. Opus 4.7 uses an updated tokenizer, which improves how the model processes text. The trade-off is that the same input can map to more tokens, roughly 1 to 1.35 times, depending on the content type. So you could have an extra 35%. Second, Opus 4.7 thinks more at higher effort levels, particularly on later turns in agentic settings. This improves its reliability on hard problems, but it does mean it produces more output tokens. So they're saying it is more token hungry on agentic settings in particular. So Claude Code, that's going to be the main one. So it is going to cost more. It's going to use more tokens. They have here agentic coding performance by effort levels. You can see that across the board on low, medium, high, extra high, and max, additional tokens will be needed across the board. So even though it is the same price per token, you now require more tokens because of their new tokenizer and the fact that it is hungry on the output as well. So do bear that in mind. If you are using Claude Code, if you're using the API, that means the costs will rise. It's still to be seen how this is going to affect the use in-app, inside the GUI, inside of the application. But if you are given a certain token budget, this is going to eat through that token budget faster. You're going to hit limits even faster. What they have done, and they always do this, is they have bumped everyone's tokens for the first couple of weeks. It seems like a generous thing to do, but this is a good way to plaster over any annoyances that come from the release of a new model and it having tighter limits. Codex did this really well. They did 2 times limits from February to April. They've just stopped that. So they've just come out of the 2x limits. And now people are like, Codex keeps hitting limits. It's because we've become used to the 2 times limits. We're seeing the same thing with Opus 4.7 with additional tokens just to get us over this hump, get us through, make sure the PR is positive. And then in a few weeks from now, we'll be like, wait, hang on, why do I keep hitting these limits? So be careful here. The new tokenizer is going to hurt. This is up to 35% more input tokens off the bat. And this is them just saying this outright. Token retrieval. This is the other slightly worrying thing. I don't want to get too much into the technical details of this, but there is a particular benchmark called the MRCR, which they have not included. No, they have not included in their main announcement, but they have included in the systems card, which I'll include in the newsletter. The OpenAI MRCR, multi-round co-reference resolution, is a publicly available benchmark that evaluates how well language models can locate and distinguish between multiple similar pieces of information within long contexts. How good is the model at finding information when you give it a huge amount of information? A big context, which is important because Opus has a 1 million token context window. How well can it find information inside of this larger context? Opus 4.7 is significantly worse at this task than Opus 4.6. So Opus 4.6 is pretty good at it, 92% it scored on the benchmark, beating Gemini 3.1 Pro and GPT 5.4 High. It was very good at working with large contexts, which is useful because when you have a 1 million token context window to work with, you need the model to be able to access and see the information from around that context window. Very good at that. Useful if you're working with big code bases or if you're doing content, you'll be able to look at all of your scripts, all of your blog articles and work with all of that at the same time. Opus 4.7 has dropped to 59.2, a drop of about 30%. It drops it down to Gemini 3.1 Pro level and below GPT 5.4. Now, they have said that somebody called them out on this. They said, well, what the hell happened here? I think it was Boris Cherney, who's the head of Claude Code, tweeted saying, oh, we're not using that benchmark anymore, and that's not something that we are actively working on. That uncovers a couple of things. One, that all of these companies build their models for the benchmarks because they need it to look good when they launch. They need these kind of graphics so people are like, ooh, wow, this is smart. So it's kind of a tacit admission of that. But also maybe it points to the fact that the MRCR is not that useful, or third possibility, Opus 4.7 is genuinely not very good at large context windows. We will see. Again, it only came out a few hours ago, so we're going to get an awful lot more details over the next few days. This is worrying. There's a couple of things that are worrying, and this is one of them. Other people have reported, especially on Hacker News, increased safeguards. I'm not sure if I can find the exact comment, but a few people have been talking about the fact that it will trigger warnings much more quickly than 4.6. This may be a bug, this may be temporary. This seems to be popping up a lot with requests being refused. I can't remember any requests that I had with 4.6 being refused. It seems to be more with 4.7. Again, this is very early days. But I think the big news and the big thing we as individual users need to worry about is limits. Limits were already a problem with Claude. So I am on the $200 a month plan. That's a lot of money. I use it for business, so it is fine. But for an individual, $200 a month is, for most people, out of range. However, even on $200 a month, I was hitting limits with 4.6. That's kind of wild. I was not a full-time coder. I was not using it to run OpenClaw. I was not doing anything particularly heavy, but I was still slapping into limits, and that basically ends my work for the day. So if you're on $100, if you're on $20 a month, you are going to hit those limits fast. And based on what we've just seen about the tokenizer, you might hit it 30% faster using Opus 4.7. That's a problem because already people are struggling with Opus. Now, what they say is if you're on the Pro plan, so $20 a month, you should be using Sonnet. You shouldn't be using Opus. Yes, you have access to Opus, but realistically, you're going to have a few turns of Opus and that's it. So you should be using Sonnet. So realistically, that is the case. I think increasingly on the $100 a month plan, that might also be true. You might need to bump it down from Opus 4.7 down to Sonnet. It's hard to tell for them because they have increased limits to smooth us through this transition, but I would be worried. The main problem people have with Claude is limits. It's an amazing model. It's super smart. It's an absolute powerhouse for work, for coding, for anything you can throw at it. But the limits, the running into a message which is like, okay, well, that's it for the day. Off you go. That is a gigantic problem when you are trying to work with it in a business setting. Opus 4.7 is going to make that worse, not going to make that better. So I think we're going to see an awful lot of complaints. I think, and I've talked about this before, they don't care about individuals. They do not want individual users. That is not where the money comes from. They certainly don't want free users. The free plan for Claude is an absolute joke for a good reason. They don't want freeloaders. If you look at OpenAI has nearly 1 billion users. Most of them are free. That's just cost. That is data centers, that transmission, that is just cost, which is why they hemorrhage money. On the other hand, they're focusing on enterprise. They're focusing on B2B. They're focused on API sales, so paying per usage. Every time you send a message, you pay a small amount. That's where they make money. About 80% of their revenues come from enterprise and API. It's a much better business model. You've probably heard they're starting to catch up with, potentially even overtake the revenue rates of OpenAI and ChatGPT, especially in the last few months. They've just rocketed. That's because they're focusing on enterprise, they're focusing on the API. And even inside of OpenAI, Fujisimo, who is the head of applications, has said, look, we need to stop focusing on the side projects. We need to make some money. And that's why things like Sora have been killed. That's why things like the adult mode have been killed. They're killing things across the board so they can focus on codecs, so they can focus on the API and enterprise sales. ChatGPT and OpenAI know they need to do this like Anthropic, but Anthropic currently have a lead. So the reason we're being squeezed as individuals, as people who are paying $20, $100, $200 a month, is that we are small potatoes compared to the actual customers that Anthropic want. People who are paying thousands a day for the API costs. That's where the money is. It is sustainable, reliable, a much higher margin. They do not want us as individuals. So whenever I see people complaining on Reddit and on social media, that's the inherent truth that people are forgetting. We are not their desired customer. And it's working. They are doing extremely well, especially in the first quarter of 2026. They're making a lot of money. They are apparently up to a run rate of 30 billion. Apparently past OpenAI's 25 billion for the first time run rate. This has been contested, but either way, they are doing very, very well. They are accelerating, and most of their money is coming from enterprise. I think the big takeaway here, it's very easy to get wrapped up every single week in, oh, there's a new model and it's, oh, it does this and it does that, or to the opposite, which is, oh, it's so stupid it can't do this. It's very easy to get caught up in the drama and the noise of artificial intelligence news. There is a lot of it. So much that I can do a daily news show like this and not run out of topics. People often ask me, how do you know what to talk about? That's not a problem. It's too much to talk about. The big takeaway is that we initially thought that intelligence was going to become too cheap to meter, that we were going to get to a point where we didn't really have to think about the cost of AI. That might be the case in the future. A few years from now, 10 years from now, maybe it is so cheap that we never have to think about tokens, we never have to think about limits, we never have to think about cost. Fantastic, that's a utopia. In the meantime, it's going to be tight. And I think increasingly, the people and the businesses who have funds, who have cash, will be able to access higher levels of intelligence than those people who do not. Yes, maybe it's going to be too cheap to meter in the future, but for the next 5 years or so, it's going to get expensive, really expensive. I think the days of last year where you could basically pay your $20, your $100 a month and have unlimited access to the best AI, those are gone. And they're not coming back for a couple of years. The labs are being squeezed. Huge costs for GPUs and data centers. There are not enough data centers. Electricity is going to become a bottleneck. RAM prices are increasing. Investors are probably going to start getting scared if these companies can't actually show any return. And they're all aiming for IPOs in the future. So they want to show profitability so they can go to IPO. They can raise a huge amount of money through their IPO, initial public offering, going public on the stock market. But until the IPO, they need to tighten their belts and show that these are proper, adult, mature companies that can make money. That's what Anthropic is doing right now. And that requires cutting costs, putting limits on your customers in order to show a profit. So I think for the next couple of years, it's going to be rough, expensive, and it's going to get more and more expensive. Now is a very good time to be building before it gets worse. If you think it's bad now, I think it's going to get more and more and more expensive. Make sure you're building. This is also a good reason to be running a business and using AI inside your business, because then it's an investment. Paying $200 a month, paying $1,000 a month for your API, whatever it is a small amount compared to the amount of productivity you can get out of artificial intelligence. So in the meantime, though, how do you preserve usage? A couple of ways to do it. First, simplest, and this is what most of the labs say, is use dumber models. So use Sonnet. Do not use Opus for everything. If you're trying to do a recipe, something very basic, don't use Opus. It's overkill. The level of intelligence is too high for the task at hand. So use Sonnet, or you could even use Haiku. You can use Haiku for tiny tasks, and you probably could use Haiku to an unlimited amount. Use a dumber model. Then there's a mixed hybrid method, which is you use Opus for the high-end tasks. You use it for planning, for architecting, for high-level brainstorming, and then you use Sonnet for actual implementation of that plan. You use it for tasks that require deeper thought, and then you switch to the cheaper model. That works pretty well, especially if you define each and every step using Opus, then Sonnet will be able to follow those instructions. Another one is something called the caveman method. You've probably seen this pop up on social media recently. Basically, putting in the system instructions, reply to me like caveman. So do not use superfluous words. Do not give me long run-on sentences. Do not fully explain yourself every time. Respond to me like a caveman. So if you do this in Claude code, and it will go through everything and it'll be like, okay, me done good. It will not explain to you, and it will not waste tokens describing everything it's done. So caveman method works really well, just cutting down the amount of usage. These are temporary. Hopefully in the future, we won't need to resort to them, but right now it does work. Other things you can do. You can use Codex. If you are using Claude Code and you keep running into limits with Claude Code, use Codex. ChatGPT Codex is very, very good. And they have an app which you can download, works just like Claude Code, and it can do tasks. The limits on it are much more generous than with Claude Code. So I personally use both, depending on what kind of task. I would generally use Claude Code for larger architectural tasks, and then I will switch and in the same repo use Codex for the actual implementation. That said, Codex is very good. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't use it for architecting as well. They have created something which is like Cowork, which allows it to take over your computer. They are looking at what Claude Code are doing. They're looking at what the Claude ecosystem has, replicating it in the same way that Anthropic have been looking at OpenClaw and replicating functionality from there. So that is another option. Codex is very good. Do not sleep on it. The other thing you can do is have local models. You can use the state-of-the-art models, which are cloud-based, like Anthropic's Opus. You can use Codex, etc., for thinking, architecting, but then you use a local model, something like Minimax, for the actual implementation. That requires you have a beefy computer at home, or you rent GPU space, but that is a cost-effective way to get it done. Plus, you have the additional benefits of a local model, like security and privacy. You need to cut out things like Ralph loops. A lot of the things you will see on social media, like Ralph loops and Obsidian second brains and stuff like that. Really cool stuff. Very token intensive. They will rip through your usage very quickly. So the people playing around with these things and pushing them on Twitter, pushing them on social media probably have a lot more usage. Anything that requires the model to be constantly kind of reiterating and self-improving is just going to cost you a lot of money, unfortunately, right now. Okay, so As I said, it is early days. I also love Claude. I think Claude is fantastic. I just have some reservations about this particular release. It is very early. We're only a day in. I have not hit my limit with it so far. I'm sure I will pretty soon today. But from the other people that I've seen who have been testing it extensively overnight over in America while I was sleeping, there are problems. And very briefly, we went through them. The new Tokenizer uses up to 35% more input tokens. So your prices on input might increase up to 35%. The new adaptive reasoning is not as useful as extended thinking and uses an auto router in the same way GPT-5 did. Nobody likes auto routers. They're annoying. They take control away and they tend not to work. They added it. The big takeaway here is that limits are going to continue to be this is because they do not care about the individual users. That is not their main customer. They want enterprises, they want API sales, they want big Fortune 500 companies using this, not people on $20 a month plans. And this is part of a broader progress where intelligence is going to get more and more expensive. It's not going to get cheaper, it's going to get more expensive, at least until we sort out the GPU shortage, the RAM shortage. Yeah, maybe 10 years in the future, intelligence will be too cheap to meter. Until then, we have to use workarounds. We have to use methods, band-aid methods like the caveman method. We can't be doing Ralph loops. We need to be very protective of our usage. And I think 4.7 is just going to make that even more the case. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. And we'll see how it pans out over the next couple of weeks with 4.7. I'm going to be testing it more, and make sure you're subscribed to the newsletter so you can see how those tests go and if I find any other methods to help you extend your usage. Thank you guys. Awesome. I'm going to finish up for the day. Thank you so much, everybody. All of this will be in the newsletter. I will tie you all up. I'll provide the presentation slides, a PDF guide, plus a summary of everything. I do these lives every single day around the same time. I talk about whatever's big in the news, or if there's nothing really in the news, I'll go through a strategic guide about how to apply AI in your day-to-day or in your business. Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you. Thanks, guys.